this afternoon. I want to tell you that this is not my first visit here, but this is my first camp meeting. And I'm so excited to be here this afternoon to share in the love and the joy with my fellow brethren. You know, we have been kept at bay for almost, over 2 years. And so, you know, I just feel like we are released and we are free. And so we can just share with each other. And I called some of the brethren from one to the other that we fellowship, and I said, listen, make sure you are here because we haven't seen each other for the longest while. And if we see each other over the internet, you know, we don't see each other face to face, and so it is just a blessing for us to be here. You know, Brother Howard said that I almost didn't make it, and that is so true. I don't know what happened last night. For some reason, I was alone at home. Not alone, my son was with me, but my wife hadn't come home, and I just started feeling sick. Really, school stretch started washing me. I was to call my son and ask him to call his mother, tell her to hurry and come home, and to open the door. And I was doing some work, and I asked him to just come in the kitchen. I asked him to go and just come out the thing that I was frying some chicken in the electric fryer. And I asked him to just go and come in. It was that bad. But praise God, I'm here. I'm here. And I just want to welcome each and every one of us here. And if you will just indulge me for a minute, I want to say a special welcome to Sister Diane, who I have seen her, you know, very active on our fellowship, but it's the first time I have seen you face to face. It's just so good to be here. That's right. So we want to just welcome you, and I'm hoping that this is not the first time, but there will be many more times. And if we don't meet this side, just please make sure that we are faithful so we can meet in the hereafter. I want us to, first of all, just bow our heads for prayer. Let us pray. Father, we want to thank you for your love and for your blessing. We want to thank you that you have spared our lives, that we can come together in this fashion, camp meeting today. And we ask, Father, that as we worship, as we celebrate, as we fellowship, that you may come divinely close. Help us to open our hearts and allow you and your Son to come and dwell in our hearts, so that we might be able to accomplish great things through us. We pray in Jesus' name. I want us to turn our Bibles to Genesis 49, and we will read from verses 1 to 6. I have designated Kerry as my reader for today, so I'm going to ask if she can assist us. That's Matthew 49. Genesis 49. Let's go again. Genesis 49, verses 1 to 6. Go ahead.
Genesis 49, 1 to 6. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves together, and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unless unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou on. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor, be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig.
She's getting there.
They dig down a wall.
All right. All right. Let us just take a time to analyze what is happening here. Now, Jacob was at the end of his journey. His time of him passing from this earth was at hand. And it is customary for the patriarch of the family to call his children together to give them blessings. And this was a time of great honor, especially for the firstborn, because it is the firstborn that is normally bestowed with the blessings and the birthright and all of that. I want us to realize that Reuben, Simeon, and Levi were what? They were brothers, but they were the eldest. Reuben being the eldest. Right there, they were the eldest children, especially Reuben. You would have expected that at a time like this, the firstborn would have been bestowed with a lot of honor and blessings. But something strange happened. What we notice is that instead of a blessing for these three brothers, Jacob pronounced a curse. He pronounced a curse on the three brothers, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. What could have caused this? And I want us to turn to Genesis 35 and verse 22. Genesis 35, and we will see what is it that happened why Jacob pronounced a curse on his firstborn Reuben. Genesis 35 verse 22.
And it came to pass, when Israel dwelled in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12.
Okay. And if we turn, it's a long text, a long chapter, but I will just give you a summary. Genesis 34, it tells us what happened with Levi and Simeon. Let me just basically say, before I look at the account of what happened to Levi and Simeon, why their father pronounced a curse instead of a blessing on them, my topic this afternoon is turning your curse into blessings. Turning your curse into blessing. Now, Jacob had a daughter by the name of Diana, right? And we know the story well, right? You had, what was it? It says Haman. It was Haman. What's the father's name? The son's name was Genesis 34. Shechem, yeah, Shechem. Mm-hmm. Right? No, man. Levi and Simeon, daughters. Their sister was Diana. And it so happened in Genesis 34, Kerry, that Shechem lie with Diana. And of course, you know that in this time it was something that was not, well, not only the fact that she was not married, but they were also what? Not of the? They were not of Israel. No, Shechem's father wanted to do the honorable thing. And he said, listen, came to Jacob and he said, listen, you know what has happened between my son and your daughter. He loves her. He wants to marry her. Right? And of course, Levi and Simeon, they came up with a plot. Said, listen, we cannot allow our sister to marry an uncircumcised person. It is forbidden in Israel. So the only way we'll allow you to marry our sister is if all the men of your city circumcise. And of course, we know what happened. They had no intention of giving giving their sister up to marriage. So what happened was when they decided that they wanted to do this, and of course they circumcised all the male of the city because they felt that it was something good to do. When they were sore, Simeon and Levi went through and slay every single man. Right? So much that Jacob said that he was afraid because he was saying, listen, when the other nations, when they hear, what is it that you have done, they are going to come against me. And so we find the situation here where Jacob was now saying, listen, because of what you have done, right? Because of what you have done, I am cursing you. So he cursed both Levi, Simeon, and of course earlier we noticed that he had cursed Reuben. Now we notice who was doing the cursing? Jacob, isn't that so? Was he a man? Was Jacob one of the most honorable person? Right? So often we find, brethren, so often, and we need to take a story from this, that some of the greatest critics of individuals are some of the people who God has, not only wrestled with, but God has basically, wrestled with them and has actually bring them to a level that God is saying, listen, I have taken you out of this, and now I am put you on a firm footing to stand. And some of the same individuals are the greatest critics. Now I want us to understand, however, that what Jacob was in fact doing was a prophecy. And it's not that, in fact, that Jacob was cursing these individuals so much, but Jacob was actually seeing what it is that would become of them. Because I will tell you this, from time to time, and I see it in my hometown where I grew up. I am from Kingston, and I grew in one of the most volatile areas. And you see from time to time where an individual would come out to be not so pleasant, not so good, and their offspring follow suit. Why did the offspring follow suit? They followed suit because the example was set for them, right? They come and see their father or their mother or whatever, their relative doing certain things, and they follow suit. So that is really what was happening here. It is not that God was cursing these individuals, but God was saying, listen, the example that you are setting is going to basically ensure that your descendants follow the wrong path. And we saw the same example with Abraham, with Noah, and his son. It was what? Ham? Right? It was Ham. Now, Ham basically is the one who went in unto his father and saw him naked, is that so? But notice when Noah was pronouncing a curse, did he pronounce a curse on Ham? No, he pronounced a curse on Canaan, which was what? Ham's grandson. Which is in fact saying, listen, because of the example that you are setting for your children, right? For the generation that comes, that follows, will also be doing the same thing. They will, right? But I'm here to tell you that despite of what we see, and we see it every day, how many times, and I'm sure that we can all relate to this, how many times have you heard parents telling their children, and this especially happens when two parents don't get along anymore, right? When husband and wife split and there's a child, and one parent will tell you, you're worthless, you will never come to anything, right? You're just like your papa, or you're just like, you understand? I am saying that when these individuals do this, they are actually pronouncing a curse. And when they pronounce a curse, it will follow the children to generations, right? But I am here to tell you that guess what happened? Thank God that God can turn your curse into blessings. God, right? Because so much of us grew up with this. Hearing that you will never account for anything, hearing certain things, and what happened. Because you hear it so many times, right? We will believe it. And when we believe it, we start acting it. And we start living it. It becomes our habit until it becomes our character. But I am here to tell you that despite what you hear, God can turn your curse into blessings. Amen. Now, sometimes when individuals do certain things, whether parent or children, they will say, listen, and you talk to them, they say, listen, this is my business, nobody's business but my own. You hear that all the time. Why are you fussing yourself about it? This is my business, my life, I can do what I want. But I'm here to tell you that, listen, contrary to what you believe, whatever you do not only affect you, it affects others as well. So if you are not willing to do things for yourself, think about the others that you are affecting and do it for them. Because if you do not change, I will tell you this, it will not be well. Now, Jacob was quick to pass judgment on his children. In fact, if you analyze the statement that Jacob was in fact saying, especially to Simeon and Levi, he was saying that you guys disgust me. That is what he was in fact. If you put it in today's language, you guys disgust me. I cannot stand to look at you. Right? That is what he was in fact saying, I can't stand to look at you, you disgust me. But I am here to tell those who feel that, or those who have heard the words, I can't stand here, just like your papa, you'll never back down to anything. And we hear it all the time, that listen, despite you hear that, right? Despite you hear those words, I can tell you that God can turn your curse, all of these curse, into blessings. I am here to tell you that God does not look at who you are. God looks at who you can become. I am here to tell you that the depth of your past does not have to determine the heights of your future. I am here to tell you that there's a reason for those of you who drive. There's a reason when you look at the windscreen of the car, it is so big. And when you look at the rear view mirror, it is so small. You know why? Because what is in front of you is far more important than what is behind you. So let us understand that. Brethren, the future is far more important than the past. And I'm not saying that we are supposed to discard the past, but what I am saying is that look to the future, because the future is where eternity and salvation lie. Amen. Right? Please remember that. I am here to tell you that God can turn your curse into blessing. You hear how much time I say it? Because if you say it enough time, you will start believing it. So stop believing in the words that you hear. God can turn your curse into blessings. Now, how do I know that? How do I know that God can turn your curse into blessings? Right? Do you realize that God took a man with a speech defect, and he turned him into a mighty leader? That's what he did for Moses. Do you realize that God took a murderer, an adulterer, and turned him into a man after his own heart? That's what he did for David. Do you realize that God took a prisoner and turned him into a prime minister? That's what he did for Joseph. God took an harlot, a prostitute, and elevated her to the position that she became one of the foreparents of the greatest man that ever walked this earth, Jesus. That's what he did for Rahab, the harlot. Right? God, how great is God? Let me tell you how great is God. Right? God went into the enemy's camp, Satan's camp, and he said to Satan, show me your champion. Show me who is your baddest thing. Show me who you have, right, that is leading your cause. And I can imagine Satan actually looking and said, that man over there, he is my champion. He is the man that is championing my cause. And God took that man and lifted him out of Satan's camp and put him into his camp. And that man became a champion for God. That's what he did for Paul. Saul, who became Paul. So notice that God, so let me tell you something. So there is nothing, brethren, there is nothing too difficult for God. Brethren, I can tell you this. He can turn your curse into blessings. Now, I want us to turn to Exodus 32, and we'll read and see exactly what happened there. It is a story about when Moses went up into the mountain. And you remember what happened? What happened? When he went up into the mountain, the children of Israel said that he was up there too long. Isn't that so? Just a little bit too long. And so they started to say, Moses has neglected us. He has neglected us. Listen, let us make ourselves gods so that we can worship them. And they made what? They took off their golds and whatever, and they made a golden image, a calf. Isn't that so? And when Moses came down, what happened? When Moses came down and he saw them, and Moses said, who is on the Lord's side? Come with me. Because he saw this despicable thing that the children of Israel was doing. They were worshiping other gods. God said, thou shalt not have any other God before me. And they were worshiping this golden calf. And when Moses said, who is on the Lord's side? Stand with me. Who you think stood? The cursed tribe. The one that this man said, listen, you disgust me. I don't even want to be in your presence. You're good for nothing. The tribe of Levi stood for God. And guess what happened? That was their turning point. That was their turning point. I want us to turn to Numbers 8, verse 13 and 14, and let us read what it says here. Numbers 8, verses 13 to 14. And let me read it. And thou shalt set the Levites before Aaron and before his sons, and offer them as an offering unto the Lord. Thus thou shalt separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. You didn't hear that? God is saying that Levites shall be mine. Let us notice now that God elevated the Levites because they stood for him. God elevated them to a position where they were now God's representative on earth. Because who was the priest on earth? They are the Levites, but who was the priest representing? Jesus. The priest was a representation of Jesus. So God gave them that position. Brethren, I will tell you this, that because of the Levites standing for God, God stand for them. Let me tell you, it doesn't matter how far you wander from God. It does not matter how far you wander from God. Do you realize that no matter how far you wander from God, He is always following you? So, if you take 1,000 steps from God, don't need 1,000 steps to come back to Him. You just need one step back. You know why? He's right beside you, so he's following you all the way, pleading with you to come back. So you just take one step back. And that is how loving God is. So no matter how cursed you feel, no matter how you feel, I will tell you this, that God will always turn your curse into blessing. All you have to do is to give yourself to him. You know, I remember, as I said, coming up into a community. I lived in the community of Augustown, born and grew there. And I remember this gentleman, notorious fella, notorious gunman, won't call his name, right? He lived and he died by the gun. Now he had a son, and incidentally, for some strange reason, his son got his name, you know, a junior. And he lived and died just like his father. He would not have even said, okay, let me see if I can break this generational curse. He died just like his father, lived by the gun, and he died by the gun. But let me tell you something. God, if you will avail yourself, will turn your curse into blessings. I want to tell you a story about an 11-year-old boy. Very interesting story. From the same community that I was from, Augustown, 11-year-old. At the age of 11, this boy's father told him, and I'm putting it mildly, he didn't say it in such mild terms. He said, "You are manure. You are good for nothing. All you're good for is to really just manure plant." That's what his father told him. And that boy lived with the statement of his father that, listen, you're good for nothing. All you're good for is to manure plant. And so he started acting like that. But his mother had a great influence on him. And so, when he remembered how disappointed his mother would be for the path that he was taking, he decided that this was not the life for him. Amen. And so,
you know, while you're speaking, the only text that just jumped out at me is Deuteronomy 11:26, which says, "I have set before you blessing and cursing." And God not only tells you that he sets blessing and cursing, but he asks you to choose life, that love, and that son. He's putting everything, laying all the cards before you, and he's telling you which one to choose for you to get eternal life. And I'm just happy that I have come to know and understand who my Savior is, who God is, and that his goal for me is just to be with him when all of this controversy is ended, when the earth is made new. He's saying, choose life, carry. So whatever befell you in your growing up, whatever curse your parents have set on you, he's telling you all of this is behind you, as you said with the rearview mirror. So just choose life, look ahead, choose life, and you shall succeed, you shall live.
Thank you very much, Gary. That boy was going into a life of crime, and he started mixing with the wrong crowd. But then he remembered his mother, and he said, listen, my mother would not love for me to be doing this. And so at the age of 15, he turned his life over to Christ. And he became not only a Christian, but he excelled academically to the point where God elevated him to the position that he headed an organization. And my only regret is that my father was not here today.
to see this. Because that little boy is me. He told me that I would not account for anything. But God knew otherwise. God knew otherwise. So when I tell you that God can turn your curse into blessings, I can tell you that I have experienced it for myself. I've experienced it. You know, when the children of Israel were about to enter the promised land, there were 2.5 tribes that they looked at the plains beyond, and they looked at it and they said, this is nice land. And they asked to stay there. And we talk about this story all the time, but you know, when I read that story, I have a problem with it. Because beyond that was where? The promised land. Where did God promise them? The promised land. Brethren, we don't want to be on this side of Jordan. Let us not stop on this side of Jordan. Sometimes we see the beautiful land. We see all of those things, right? But let me tell you something. God wants us to cross over Jordan and cross into the promised land. Let us understand that. You know, I want us to also understand, you know, God, if you look at the examples in the Bible, God is always the God of the underdog. God is always the God of the people, the ones who people say will account for nothing. Look at it. When you look at, and I described it earlier, Rahab. Who was she? A harlot. When you look at Ruth, who was Ruth? A Moabite. Not from the tribe of Israel. But God used her. I think God was trying to tell Israel, you know, that, listen, despite the fact that I have chosen you to carry out my mission, the others are still special. I think that is what God was trying to show Israel. And Israel didn't even realize that. When you look at Gideon, when the angel found Gideon and said, called him a mighty man of valor. You know where Gideon was in? He was threshing wheat in a wine press. You know why he was in the wine press? He was hiding. Coward, isn't that so? But the angel looked at him and said, mighty man of valor. Right? This man who was hiding for fear of the Midianites, the angel looked at him and said, you are a mighty man of valor. I tell you, God don't look at who you are, he look at who you can become. So let us understand that, brethren. And when God calls us, let us obey. When you look even in the New Testament, David, so right there, Ian. When Samuel came to select the king, David was not even considered. Wasn't even considered. But as the Bible said, man look at the outward appearance, but God look at the heart. When God called his disciples, who did he call? Humble fishermen. I tell you, God always favors the underdog. He always favors the underdog. Zacchaeus, hated by everybody. But God called him. Jesus called him and said, listen, today I'm going to dine at your house. And one of the most powerful example of God favoring the underdog. Who remember the woman at the well? The Jews called them dogs. She was hated by the Jews. She was hated by her own. And do you realize how many examples do we have in the Bible where Jesus said, I am the Messiah? In other words, he went out of Israel and he went to an outcast and tell the outcast, plain and straight, no going around the bush, no parable. I am he that speak to you, the underdog. Mary Magdalene, one which was also a prostitute, which Jesus actually cast out 7 devils. And do you realize that Mary Magdalene was the first person that Jesus talked to when he raised from the dead? Yes, the woman Mary Magdalene, that underdog, that Jesus said, listen, go and tell my brethren, go and tell them that I have arisen. Right? So God always favors the underdog. Let us understand, in wrapping up, brethren, let us understand that we can always say, I can't figure it out. But God says, I will direct you. You might say, I am too tired. But God says, I will give you rest. You might say, it is impossible. But God says, all things are possible. You might say, nobody loves me. But God says, I love you. You might say, I can't forgive myself. But God says, I forgive you. You might say, it is not worth it. But God says, it will be worth it. You might say, I am not smart enough. But God says, I will give you wisdom. You might say, I am not able to. But God says, my grace is sufficient. Amen. You might say, I can't do it. But God says, you can do all things. You might say, I can't manage. But God says, I will supply your needs. You might say, I am afraid. But God says, I have not given you the spirit of fear. You might say, I feel all alone. But God says, I will never leave you. You might say, I am cursed. But God says, I can turn your curse into blessings. You know, brethren, as we are here this afternoon, contending with the horsemen, that is the topic, the theme for our camp meeting, let us understand that, you know, Jeremiah, when it speaks of this, it says that, listen, if you can't run with the footmen, right, how are you going to contend with the horsemen? God is in fact saying that with me all things are possible. Some of us reach a stage where we feel that it is just, you know, things are nice, things are going smooth. Why do I bother? But if we should learn anything from the lockdown, from what has happened with the pandemic, we should learn that the horsemen is coming, and the swelling of Jordan is coming. And this, brethren, was just a little test. How much of us passed that test? How much of us bottled and waver when we were supposed to stand for God? You know, some weeks ago, or probably could be months ago, I was watching a YouTube video about, it was a young lady from Iran, and she was giving her testimony about how she was thrown in prison and persecuted simply because she was a Christian. And when she was giving her story, and when she told about some of the things that she did in prison and how she stood for God, despite the fact that she was given the opportunity time and time again to denounce her God and just stand with the opposing faith, Muslim, she stood for God. And she never wavered. And God stood for her. Just like how he stood for Daniel. Just like how he stood for the Hebrew boys. That stood for her. And she was able to be released from prison. I'm saying that we are worshiping God relatively free. Do not take it for granted. Because the day is coming when it will be no more. And I am saying, stand for God. Stand for God. Stand for Him no matter what. Because I am telling you that even if you feel like you're cursed, God can turn your curse into blessings. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I always wanted to be here. And this morning I almost didn't to make it here. I was having car issues, and I just about gave up on coming. And then I tried again, and bam, car started. And I'm here. And I'm really feeling blessed to be here already. And I was blessed by my brothers, Brother Harris, I was blessed by the Philippines now. And I've been there. I'm still coming up. But God is good. And Christ will never leave us nor forsake us. That's what He promised. And we can be back on that. When He comes, all of us have a choice of being whole with Him. Amen. One man sat alone beside the highway begging. His eyes